For example, and this is the point I'm making here is when you start asking the questions, using the game plan to kind of do the gardening part, things happen that are just amazing. So I mentioned being on the airplane and sitting down next to weird people, right? Well, in this particular case, the plane was almost full. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. It was almost full, and there was one seat left next to me. Well, maybe there was a couple of others, but anyway, this young man is walking down the aisle towards me, okay? Now, this young man let me just say, he's not in my cultural niche, all right? He's a black guy, young black man, and he's which isn't a problem for me, but he was, I don't know, is the word hip-hop, is that the right word? I'm totally out of touch with this stuff, but he had the hat and all the jewelry and the trousers, and all this stuff. And I'm praying for him as he's walking down the aisle. And I'm praying, Lord, do not let that young man sit next to me. That was my prayer. Well, God didn't answer that prayer, and he sat right down next to me. Now, here's my point, as God is my witness. Don't ask me how it happened. I don't know how it happened. I do know, though, even though, I like to have my own life without being bothered, like most people, I'm still willing to be used. And within 5 minutes, maybe 7 at the most, we were talking about the Lord. Go figure. Because when I started talking to him, all of a sudden, all that other stuff disappeared, and I realized I am talking to another human being who needs Jesus. And he began to tell me about his life and some of the hardship he's experiencing. Where did this come from? It came from the Holy Spirit. But I had to have a willingness to begin to engage even in a circumstance that was culturally uncomfortable for me. All right, just so you know. I'll give you one other story before I move in. Again, to encourage you to just get started, even if you got one step. So I'm in Normal, Illinois. This is where the Illinois State University is, in that town. But I was speaking at a local church, not at the school, and I had lunch with one of the people at the church who is a PhD in biology, and he is a professor at the local junior college. All right? So he's a Christian. He rejects Darwinian evolution. And he engages his students a lot on that particular issue with all the knowledge that he has, right? But he's telling me at lunch now that he'd read the book on tactics, and he's a PhD, this is so simple. Why should he do this when he can tell them all the stuff he knows, right? But he thought, I'll give it a try. And so he sat down with one of his students, and instead of explaining why some aspect of Darwinian evolution didn't seem to work, he started with the student, and he asked the student, you explain to me how this actually works. For example, to get the ball rolling for evolution, you have to go from dead stuff to living stuff. So on the planet, there's nothing alive, and then there's things that are alive, and then they're developing in the Darwinian model. So that's called origin of life stuff. So he's asking a question about that. And any of you in biology, or you traffic in this idea, this is a tough problem for all of these materialistic Darwinists. Even non-materialistic ones. It's tough. How do you get living stuff from dead stuff? So here's what he told me happened. So he's doing the tactical thing. I'm setting my PhD aside. I'm just going to ask my student, tell me how this works. What do you mean by that? That's the question. And so the student says, okay, I'll tell you. And he pulls out a piece of paper and his pen, and he starts sketching out a kind of characterization of how you can go biochemically from dead stuff to living stuff, right? And he gets a little ways through this characterization, and the professor tells me the student stops and looks at what he wrote, and he tells the professor, well, this is actually a better argument for intelligent design. Let me try something else. So he gets another piece of paper out, and he starts the same thing, and he goes another direction, because there are different ideas about how this might work, but none of them work. And as he's penciling it out on the paper, he stops a second time, and he said, yeah, you know what, this is also a better argument for intelligent design. Now think about it. The professor who was the Christian was a PhD in biology. He's one of the smart guys. He's loaded for bear with this kid, right? But what does he do? He doesn't do any of that stuff. He simply asks a question, and in this particular circumstance, this is how it worked out. It doesn't always work out like that. Sometimes nothing happens. You just move on. But I've seen enough times, not only in my life, but in the lives of other people, when they began to employ these things and just with a simple step forward, like with that professor, for example, God does something amazing. That's what's so much fun for me. That's what encourages me to push the envelope a little bit of my own comfort level and be willing to take a chance. But it's not much of a chance, because remember I said before, we're in the shallow end of the pool, right? When you ask questions, there is no risk on you. You're not making your case, not yet. You're just laying a foundation, and the first step of the foundation is to gather information. So let's pick it up from that spot, because we talked a bit about that in the last session. I got into the game plan proper. And the first step, very simple step, not very profound, just gather information. Get the lay of the land with the individual you're talking with, about their own person, about their own beliefs possibly, and if you're already involved in some kind of spiritual conversation, like they're already raising challenges against you, this is especially where you want to get clarity on the charge against you that's being made. And so I offered a question as a model question, and that question was, audience participation time? Yeah. What? Thank you. What do you mean by that, or some variation? Now, the what do you mean by that is the easy thing to remember, but also remember it's very flexible, and I gave you illustrations, lots of illustrations and conversations, and there's a lot more in the book about how that statement can be made in lots of different ways. Just like the biology professor says, okay, tell me how you get living stuff from dead stuff. That's your job. How does that work? Okay, and then off he went. He didn't have to do any work. It was the student that was doing all the work, and he didn't get anywhere productive except for to acknowledge, hey, that looks like intelligent design to me. Okay, so that's the first step. And I want you to see what you accomplished just with the first step. You are engaging your friend here in an interactive way. You're showing a genuine interest in their own views, which is polite. It's good manners. You are forcing that person to think more carefully about what they actually do believe. Very important step here. Very important element of this first step, rather. And you're also getting a free education, finding out about that person's point of view. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there's no pressure on you. You're in the driver's seat. You're directing this thing. I've been doing interactive talk radio for 30 years, and I do interviews with people with books, but I also have people that interview me on books that I write. When I talk about this tactic and get to this particular point, I mention them, look at this interview we're doing. Look at, you're the boss of this interview, but I'm doing all the work. I'm doing all the talking, but I'm going in the direction that you want me to go. How are you doing that? I said to the interviewer. He says, well, by the questions I'm asking exactly. The questions that you ask directs the conversation. You don't do the heavy lifting, the other person does, but you are in the driver's seat, and that's where we want to be as much as possible. So now you know from your questioning what another person believes. All right? That's the goal of the first one, lay of the land. Here's the second application of Columbo, and I'm going to call this second step reversing the burden of proof. Reversing the burden of proof. So first gather information, to now reverse the burden of proof. That's the second step of 3 steps here in the game plan. Now the burden of proof is a phrase that you may be familiar with. It's a term that refers to a person's responsibility to give evidence or reasons for a point of view. Okay, pretty straightforward. All right. Here's the key question though. In any conversation, who is it that bears that responsibility? Who has the responsibility to give reasons or evidence? Who bears the burden of proof? And I'll tell you the rule. It's very simple. The rule is the person who makes the claim bears the burden. The person who makes the claim bears the burden. Now, this is the way American jurisprudence works, right? If you get the DA knocking at your door, and you open the door and he says, you robbed the bank, you get to say what? Prove it. because the burden of proof is on the one making the accusation or the claim, all right? By the way, I was in Chino Hills, which isn't too far from here, big church, Jack Hibbs' church a few years ago, teaching the same material. And when I said, the DA knocks on your door and says, you robbed the bank, what do you get to say? Some guy in the back said, which bank? I didn't rob that one, I robbed another one. You know, it's like, what? That actually happened. Because the burden of proof is always on the accuser. So if you say something is so, and it's controversial, it's up to you. It's your responsibility to give reasons why someone should take that seriously, okay? Now, I want to tell you why this notion here is so practically important. It's not simply academic, burden of proof. The problem is that for many of us as followers of Christ, as we engage people in conversation who make charges against our convictions, all right? When they make charges against our convictions, they're making claims. The Bible's not reliable, God doesn't exist, Jesus never existed, you can't trust this or that or the other, evolutionists, they're making claims. And what ends up happening lots of times is we feel like it's our job to disprove their claim, especially if you've had some apologetics training. We think it's first our job to disprove them, and that's not the way it works. It's not our job to disprove them, it is their job to give evidence for their own claim. All right? And if we respond to their challenge by trying to refute their challenge, we're giving them a free ride. And so here's the application, no more free rides. And here comes another 60s alert, just saying. In the immortal words of Ricky Ricardo, they got a lot of splaining to do themselves, right? Now, some of you are going, who's Ricky Ricardo? Lucy, you cannot be on the show, that guy. They just made a movie out of this, right? Then they got a brick, so he's kind of back in the public view. The point is, they got to do their splaining. He was Cuban, that's why he talked that way. They got to do their splaining. They got to explain why they believe what they just said they believed, okay? Now, this is a little bit of turnabout, but it's appropriate, okay? We do not want to take the responsibility to refute the claims that they are making, okay? It's kind of like you guys know what a gauntlet is, right? It's a gauntlet. It's got a medieval glove, okay? And they throw the gauntlet down. What is that? It's a challenge, right? So you throw the gauntlet down. The knight doesn't throw the gauntlet down and then say, I win. The other guy's just saying, wait a minute, you just got in the game. Now you got to put up and shut up. Now you got to show what you've got. Well, there's a parallel here in conversations with people. They throw the gauntlet down. They say things like, well, I could explain that. And then they give their explanation. There's nothing wrong with them giving an alternate explanation to your view. Oh, I can explain why people thought Jesus was the Son of God, and that's because of the Council of Nicaea, blah, 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 this and that happened. And so they give this kind of Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code kind of characterization. Okay, there's nothing wrong with them offering alternate explanations. But they are not done when they've done that. They now have to give you reasons why they think their alternate explanation is a better explanation than yours. And that's the step that is missing, that frequently that is the burden of proof step. Now a number of years ago, but quite a while ago, I was on KFI. I've been on that program a number of times in the past. Well, KFI, some of you know, this is the talk jock, shock jock station here in Southern California, more stimulating talk radio, right? And so I was asked to come on and do a show on Sunday night, and I was talking about creation and intelligent design versus evolution. This was the topic, all right? So there was then the callers, and you talk for 15, 20 minutes, then they open the lines and callers come after you, okay? And there was a caller who raised an issue, because I'm arguing for an intelligent design creator, okay? And there was a caller who called in who raised Big Bang cosmology against my view. Now, I know this is controversial in Christian circles, but what I don't think a lot of Christians understand is that all the Big Bang cosmology that I care about says is that there was a beginning to the universe. There was a beginning to the universe. I believe that. We all believe that. In the beginning, bang, the universe came into existence. And so since this is what they uniformly believe, whether they're accurate or not in the way they characterize it doesn't matter. This is their affirmation of something that we believe as well, the beginning of the universe. We can use that. And anyway, so I'm explaining to this guy, well, the Big Bang actually works in my favor because, I don't know, and this is the way I like to put it, a Big Bang needs a big banger, that's pretty straightforward. And that's usually a fairly funny line, but there's a lot of people here who don't like the Big Bang, I can tell that right off. But it's a very common sense notion. Any major effect that you have needs to have a cause that is adequate to the effect. So the universe boomed into existence. Who boomed the big boom? If you want to use that terminology. That was my point. Now he's coming back at me with an alternate explanation. What I just offered, in sum, is a standard argument for God's existence. It's called a cosmological argument. It's an argument for God's existence based on the existence of the cosmos. This particular version is a version of the Kalam cosmological argument. That's just for you people who like apologetics. But here's what's important. As though I was making the point that the universe doesn't come from nothing, right? But he disagreed. So he's going to explain how you can get something from nothing. And here's what he says. I have it in my notes, his exact words. Well, I don't think it is. In other words, I don't think that's a favor on your side, because you could start with a base of nothing, and you could say that there was nothing but an infinite continuous moment. And eventually one tiny little insignificant thing happened. A point happened in the nothingness. Now let me just pause for a moment. One of the things if you talk to people about this kind of stuff, the origin of the universe, it's amazing how often people treat nothing as if it's something. All right? They do it all the time. And that's what he's doing here. First you have a base of nothing. Nothing isn't a base. Nothing is no thing. There's nothing there. All right? So it can't be any kind of base anything. What you're saying is there's nothing there. I agree with you. There was nothing there from a physical perspective. Okay? Then he goes on. Then a point happened in the nothingness, and then the point expanded, which is extremely simple. Requires no intelligence, so no intelligent God had to intervene. Listen. If you start with nothing, and I'm doing this like this is an empty space, but nothing isn't even that. It's not even space. How do you get a point in it? That's the whole problem. Where did the point come from? What caused the point to penetrate the nothingness? Maybe it's a very small point, so it's easier in his mind. But he didn't solve the problem. He merely repeated the problem that he needed to solve. And then he says, all we need is a little tiny imperfection in the perfect nothingness. Again, perfect nothingness, if it's nothing, it doesn't have any adjectives that apply to it. Never mind. Keep going. And that imperfection expanded, it became variegated and increasingly complex, and soon you had galaxies and planets and stuff. And so I got to answer this guy, right? He starts with nothing, all of a sudden you get a point of something, and then this makes the nothing really annoyed, and it starts bucking and weaving, spitting out planets, and there you have it. There's your explanation. That's what he's offering me, right? And I'm thinking, I got to answer this. Well, this is LA, this guy's probably on drugs. That's what's going on here. But I'll tell you how I answered. I said, it's interesting, and this goes to this second point. It's interesting the way you started. You said you could say that, and then you spun your tail. You're right. You can say anything you want. But giving us reasons to believe what you just said, that's a whole nother enterprise altogether, and that's what you have responsibility to do. You never told us anything how this is possible, and in fact, when we look closely at the words, we realize he didn't give any explanation at all. He just said there was nothing and there was something. But that's the problem. How do you make sense of that? Now, a little later, I'll show you, as we use Columbo number 3, how you can actually form that into in a certain sense, a cooperative conversation with someone to make the point that the smart money is on God as the creator. But in any event, when you hear the phrase, I can explain that, that is a tell. That is an indicator sometimes that a person is about to spin a tale. Okay, let them spin the tale. Ask clarification questions about it. But when they get done, once you understand what they think is a better story than your story, a better accounting than what we believe, then you have your second Columbo question. And your question is this, some form of, how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to that conclusion? Or why do you think that's the way it actually took place? How do you know that's the way it happened? This is what they ask us all the time. We should be asking them that when they give their points, and then see what happens. Now, when you ask somebody, how did you come to that conclusion, or some variation, it's very flexible, you are charitably presuming that they came to a conclusion, that they've thought about this and they concluded that their answer is the best answer. But this is not normally what goes on. People don't think through things and come to conclusions about important matters like this. They are socialized to repeat what they've heard other people in their social group say, and they spit it out. And then a lot of Christians, especially the more aggressive ones, take the burden of proof on themselves and then try to challenge and answer what has been offered. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I'm a teacher at heart, and teachers like to tell you everything they know, and so that's what I like to do. And I've got to shut up and ask the question and push the burden of proof on the other person. Let them explain why they think their alternate explanation is a good one. And this means then sometimes you're going to get Simon and Garfunkel again. You're going to get the sounds of silence, because they don't have any reasons for it. They have feelings about it, but they don't have reasons. Now, by the way, I'm not against feelings at all. I love feelings. I cry at movies, and even sports events, and I even watched, when that unbelievable horse race, 70, I can't even remember it, back in 1973, we won the Triple Crown, that particular race. Secretariat. I watched the movie, right? But you can actually watch the race. You can watch the race, go to YouTube and watch a race. I watched that race. This is an unbelievable race because the two lead horses are neck and neck all the way halfway around, and then Secretariat turns on the afterburners and just takes off and leaves the other horse absolutely in the dust. And that horse, the chief contender, ended last in the race. It was so worn out, and Secretariat won by 52 lengths. It's never been repeated before. And this is the end of the Triple Crown. And I'm watching this race, and I'm going, I'm bawling. Because it's so magnificent. I love feelings, but I do not base truth on feelings. Feelings make life delicious, but truth makes life safe. So it isn't a truth or feelings. It's having both in your life, but in the right order. Your feelings don't determine what's true. And you can't hardly watch a movie anymore without hearing, what does your heart tell you? What does your heart tell you? What does your heart tell you? I was in a church a couple of months ago, and the youth pastor had a thing on his Bible, and it says, follow your heart, ... to hell. My kind of guy. Because your heart, even the emotions of your heart, need to be soundly theologically informed. That's not in my notes. Maybe I ought to put it in there because that's a good one. All right. So now we have two steps. We have gathering information using some form of the question, what do you mean by that? We have another step where now we're going to reverse the burden of proof. We're not going to take responsibility yet for making our case with the other person. Not yet. We have time for that. But right now we're still laying a foundation, and we're trying to get the other person out and make sense of their own view. okay? And a lot of times when you ask for clarification, they're not going to be able to do this. And what ends up happening is they start getting nervous. Now, they may not tell you this, but it's the same thing that happens to you when a non-Christian approaches you and you can't deal with an issue. And you get this cold shiver up your spine. Because what you're thinking is, man, that's a good point, and I can't answer it, and something down inside says maybe he's right and I'm wrong. And that little doubt begins to creep in. This is very natural. It happens to everybody now and again, okay? Actually, there's a whole training series from an atheist, Peter Boghossian, teaching atheists, how to do that with Christians. And what has that atheist just done? That atheist has put a stone in the Christian shoe, hasn't it? And put a seed of doubt there. Now, this is what I want you to do with the truth. Put a seed of doubt in a lie and get people thinking. And when you ask them to clarify their view and you ask them to defend it just by giving reasons, that's one of the ways that the Holy Spirit starts bugging people, starts poking at them. Okay, now, before I go to the third step, I want to talk about two additional kind of maneuvers that are part of the first two steps that will help you in circumstances you may find yourself in. The first one I call the professor's ploy. And turns out in secular schools, characteristically, the professors are not Christians. They're atheists. They're very evangelistic about it. And they're going to take opportunity in their classes to go after the Christians, even if it has nothing to do with the topic. And I've had Christians tell me, I went to secular school and a professor asked, okay, who's Christian in this class? You will not be a Christian when I get done with you. That's what they say. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you're up against in a secular school. But nowadays, it's not just secular schools. It's also so-called religious schools, even Christian schools, where you have these kinds of professors that are going after the students, trying to destroy their confidence in their convictions, okay? And there's a particular way they do this. So they're going to be teaching on something, but out of the blue, maybe, they'll start attacking Christianity. And they'll say, well, the Bible's just a bunch of fables or something like that. Now, they're going to be a Christian, maybe in the audience, that's not going to take this lying down. They're going to raise their hand, and they're going to go after the professor in a kind of front-on-front, a one-on-one kind of duel, as it were. Now, my personal opinion, I think that is right-hearted, but I think it is wrong-headed. And the reason it's wrong-headed is because it violates a very basic rule of engagement, which is this: you never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position, okay? This is really dumb. The man with the microphone's going to win. He's got the advantage already, right? That's going to be very hard to deal with. But I'm not saying that you withdraw. I'm saying use your tactics instead in a circumstance like that, if you were to find yourself. You're not going to find yourself in a situation like that in this school. But you may go to grad school and you run into that. So say the professor is attacking Christianity and saying something about the Bible's a bunch of fables or something. So I don't know, what question might pop into mind right about now that you might raise your hand and ask the professor? What do you mean by that? Okay, is that an appropriate question for a student to ask? Of course it is. You're just being a student, right? And so maybe he'll respond and give more clarification. After he's clarified what he means by that, what other question might pop into your mind right at this point? How did you come to that conclusion? Excellent. So you guys are really good in that, okay? How'd you come to that conclusion? Now, the professor, though, may figure out that you're one of those Christians and you're sandbagging, okay? And you're holding back. And so he might call you out. And see, this is what I call the professor's ploy. So this is what I'm protecting you against when this kind of happens, because it's a burden of proof reversal trick. He's going to call you out, say, oh, you must be one of those Christians who believes the Bible's the Word of God, every jot and tittle. Well, look, I got a couple extra minutes here. Why don't you stand up and explain to the rest of the class why you think I'm wrong and the Bible's not a bunch of fables, but is the Word of God. Go ahead. Take it away. Okay, now what has this professor just done? He has challenged the student to disprove him, right? Okay, why is that illicit in this situation? Because the student didn't make any claims. The student didn't make the claim, the professor made the claim. I actually had a philosophy professor do this to me in Topeka, Kansas, when I spoke there at the university and took Q&A afterwards. All right? And I'm going to tell you how you deal with a professor who does that kind of thing. In other words, the professor who is saying, you prove me wrong. What you can say to the professor is, look, well, professor, actually, I'm not making any claims here at all. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just trying to understand your view and why you hold it, that's all. I might even believe what you have to say. Now, my point is, as far as the Christian who is using the tactical approach has revealed, he hasn't revealed anything else, he just asked the question. The professor has presumed something. And so you do not take the bait. You tell the professor, I'm just trying to find out what you believe and why you believe it. That's all. That's all you have to go. Do not accept the charge that is essentially, you prove me wrong. All right? And then in the case that I faced in Topeka, Kansas, I told the professor, I said, well, professor, you're the one who's making the claim in this particular issue that had to do with the problem of evil. He's a philosophy professor, too. It was just amazing to me. And I said, you're the one who's making the claim. Now you're telling me to disprove you. I said, that's not the way it works. You have to give reasons for your view. Do you have reasons for your view? It turns out he didn't for that particular thing. But he was very disgruntled with me because I wouldn't take the burden of proof on myself. So you want to avoid any kind of ploy, like I call the professor's ploy, where someone is trying to push the burden of proof on you when you haven't made the claim. And essentially they're saying, you disprove me. And you politely say, that's not my job. It's your job to give me reasons, if you have any. If you don't, that's okay, I understand that, but I'm just trying to understand the rationale. Okay, so that's the first thing. Here's the second thing. I'm going to talk to you about getting out of the hot seat. Getting out of the hot seat. Now, the hot seat, the way I'm describing it, is a place that you find yourself in. And some of you might have been in circumstances like this. I certainly have been. Where you're in kind of persuasion mode. You're carrying the ball, you're making the case, you're engaging with somebody else, and they come on really strong with you with challenges that you have no way of answering. They might be a professor, they might be a grad student, they might, whatever, you find out they know a whole lot more about this stuff than you do, and they're kind of overwhelming you, okay? And you can't answer it, you're feeling like you're kind of being pushed back a little bit, and you're looking for the exit, but it's 30,000 feet, and so there's no way out, right, if you're on an airplane. So that's the hot seat. So let me ask you a question. If you found yourself in that circumstance, who is in control, who's in the driver's seat of that conversation, you or the other person? The other person, for sure. Okay, that's not the way we want it, right? So I'm going to tell you how you can switch things very simply. It's very easy, just applying what we've learned so far, so that you can get out of this tough situation. What you're going to do is exercise a little bit of what I call kind of a conversational Aikido. Aikido is that kind of self-defense where you don't resist, but you use the other person's energy against them, something like that. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. You're not going to try to push back. You realize you can't push back. You don't have the goods. They've got it on you. So what you're going to do is you're going to invite them to come on down, essentially. Okay, and here's the way it would look. You find yourself in the hot seat, overwhelmed. You say something like this. Gee, Jim, or whoever, you seem to know a whole lot more about this than I do. You got a lot of issues or information that I can't deal with, okay? So I wonder if you could do me a favor, though. I want to hear what you have to say. Now, this is going to take some courage for some of you to say that, because we don't usually like to hear people giving reasons against our view, okay? But I'm just saying, wait this person out. Give them the opportunity, all right? I just want you, Jim, to slow down a little bit and just help me organize this two different issues. First, make it really clear to me what you believe. Like if you're saying there is no God, okay, got it, there is no God. Okay, and the second thing is I want to know precisely what are the reasons why you think that view is true. Okay? Now, you probably noticed, well, those are our first two Columbo questions. What do you mean by that, and how'd you come to that conclusion? That's all it is. But it's applied in this specific circumstance where you're kind of out of control, they're in the driver's seat, and you're feeling overwhelmed. So you say, okay, I'm not going to push back. Come on down. Tell me what you believe and why you believe it. You get a piece of paper out, take some notes, all right? Make it an educational opportunity for you. And then when the person is done doing their explanation, you can ask some more clarification questions. You say this, now let me think about it. Now let me think about it, and them's the magic words. Because when you say, now let me think about it, you're acknowledging already that you don't know how to answer these things. I can't answer everything. I get challenges that I don't know what to deal with, so I treat them with respect. I figure out what the challenge is and what the reasons are for it, and now I've got the deal. Now I can think about it. And then you do that. You think about it on your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off. On your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off. Then you could think about what they said, and then you can call a friend, or you can go to your notes, or go to a book, or go to a podcast, or something. You don't have the goods, now you're going to get the goods. And like I told you earlier this morning, we've got a tremendously deep bench. The answers are out there. And I promise you, if you get the information, the point of view, and the reasons why that particular person thinks their point of view is accurate, and then do some homework, you're going to get the answer. And you're going to be able to deal with it next time it comes up. And it won't be that cold chill up your spine next time it comes up, but you will know now how to maneuver with the information that you just gained. So basically, getting out of the hot seat, very simple. You're basically telling somebody, you want to beat me up? Okay. Just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. All right? So I want to ask you a question. Is there anybody here in this audience, I mean even the most shy, retiring, bashful, skittish, timid, or reserved, who can't say to some big, tough person who's barreling down on you, you want to beat me up? Okay, just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. Anybody can do this. You're not taking responsibility to answer something you can't answer. What you're doing is taking the opportunity to get an education so that you can be prepared next time. Okay, so those are two little side issues, the professor's ploy and how to get out of the hot seat. I have a separate chapter just of those two issues in the tactics book, okay? I've given you 2 steps of the game plan. First step, gather information. What do you mean by that? Second step, reverse the burden of proof with some form of the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Incidentally, I have more to say. I'll go to the third step, but I've actually already fulfilled my promise to you. I promised earlier today that I would give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you knew or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. I promise you these 2 steps, it's not the whole thing, but just these 2 steps will allow you to do that. You draw people out with those questions. You listen to what they have to say. You get an education. And, as I pointed out, then you watch and see what God is going to do in the process. But there's a third step, and it's a more advanced step, because in the third step, you have to know something. You don't have to know anything to say, what do you mean by that? And how'd you come to that conclusion, or whatever. The third one, you have to know something. The third use of Columbo is you're going to use questions to make a point. You're going to use questions to make a point. Now, basically 2 kinds of points you're going to make. You might be making your own point. That is, you have something to say and to communicate. My recommendation is try to use questions to do that. Well, how does that work? I'll tell you, I had a phone call once on a radio show many years ago. And a young man called in and said, I'm a new Christian. And I said, hey, that's great. Welcome to the family. Super. He said, but I have roommates that are not Christians. I think he was at UCLA at the time. And he said, why do I have to share with my roommates? Why do I have to talk to my roommates about Christ? Now, it's clear that he had become a Christian, got excited, and now his roommates are pushing back on him. They don't like what they're hearing and the changes that are taking place or whatever. And so he's calling me. He says, why do I have to do that? Why do I have to share with them? Say, I know how I want to answer this, but I want to get him to answer it. And so I want to lead him with questions so that he gets to the right answer. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Why did you become a Christian? You became a Christian? I'm glad. Okay. But why? He said, well, I wanted to get my sins forgiven. I said, well, that's a good answer. What would have happened if you had not become a Christian? I asked the caller. He said, well, if I hadn't become a Christian, then I wouldn't have got my sins forgiven, and I would have then be punished by God for the rebellion in my own life. Okay, that's not a pretty picture, right? And so he said this, and I just paused. Now, in radio, you don't want to have a lot of dead air. People change the station. But I just wanted for what he said to sink into his own ears. And I waited about 3 or 4 seconds, and all of a sudden I heard, oh, like that. Oh, like it just, and he said, so I became a Christian so I can get forgiven. If I hadn't become a Christian, I wouldn't be forgiven. So if my friends need forgiveness, which they do, and they don't become Christians, then they won't get forgiven either. He said, bingo, like that. See, he knew the answer because he became a Christian, so he had the basic, but he hadn't connected the dots. And sometimes what we're going to try to do is we're going to just try to use questions, just like I did, to help people see what they already know, but it's not clear to them. All right? So that's one way to use the questions. I could have just told it to him, but if I just said it, then I wouldn't have had the impact on him that asking the questions and leading him in the process had on him. But generally, though, I'm using questions to make the point that somebody else's view is false, okay? Now, the reason this is an advanced method is if you think somebody else's view is false, you have to know what's wrong with it. Because you can't use questions to exploit the problem unless you know what the problem is. So this third one is exploiting a weakness or a flaw. It's like having a target in view, and you're going to use your questions to aim at that target, okay? So this, I go through a lot of examples of this in the book, and this is what basic apologetics does, is it helps you to see how people's view goes south. And the tactics are what you use to exploit the liability in a most effective way. That's what I did with the witch in Wisconsin. She was defending abortion, which she called baby killing, and one of the reasons it was okay to kill a baby is through, if the baby was conceived through incest. And so I applied her view to the 2-year-old, okay? That's a tactic called taking the roof off. I said, okay, let's give your little idea a test drive, and we'll see where it leads. Some people also call this a reductio. You might be familiar with that principle. But that's one of the tactics in the book, and I walk you through how to do that. But notice I asked a question. If I had the 2-year-old here, then I should be allowed to kill this 2-year-old based on your view. Is that right? Now she's stuck. There's a very simple one-question move to exploit the flaw in her thinking, okay? I had a fellow that I was at a chiropractor, and I was getting some PT, physical therapy, done on my back, and the young man there was not a Christian, but he was very friendly and very talkative, and so I would be talking to him about spiritual things, and the issue of homosexuality came up. This was a number of years ago, and he asked what my view was on it, and so I offered my view, and I wasn't harsh or critical or nasty, but I just gave the biblical view of it. And he says, you know, you Christians are pretty nice people, but eventually, before long, you start getting judgmental. Okay, now I want you to think about what he just said. He said, you Christians start getting judgmental. Now, it is true that my comment about homosexuality entailed a moral judgment regarding it. But he had just made a mistake, and most of you don't see this, and he certainly didn't see it. But I wanted to make it more clear to him before I used my tactical approach to make it really obvious. And so I said, Gil, that was his name, I said, Gil, what's wrong with being judgmental? And he said, well, it's wrong to judge. Okay, now what is it that he is doing with me in this conversation? What is he doing? He's judging me. This happens every single time that people complain about the judgments that Christians make. Their complaint is itself a judgment. All right? Now, I'm not saying that when we are judgmental in circumstances that it's always appropriate. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to look at this circumstance. So here's what I said to Gil. I said, now I could have said, Gil, You think it's wrong to judge, but you're judging me. So there. Well, that would have been accurate, but it wouldn't have been very clever. It wouldn't have been shrewd. Instead, I used a question. And this is Columbo number 3. I said, Gil, if you think it's wrong to judge, then why are you judging me right now? That's what I said to him. I'm chuckling because it stonewalled him. I mean, he did one of these numbers, and he started thinking about it. And he backs up, and he's kind of scratching his chin and muttering to himself, a little bit, because he didn't know what just happened. And finally, he comes back and he said, well, I guess I was judging. I guess it's okay to judge. That's what he said. But, he said, but you can't push your morality on other people. Once you push your morality on other people, then you cross the line. So now I had a clarification question. Gil, is that what you just told me? By the way, he thought he had improved his circumstances, right? Okay, you're going to see that he didn't do any good for himself at all. Because I asked for clarification, is that your morality? That you shouldn't push your morality on others? Notice the should thing. I said, is that your morality? And he goes, yeah, like blithely. Yeah, that's my morality. He didn't see what was coming. So I said, well, then why are you pushing your morality on me right now? Oh, okay, yes, he's back in the corner. Finally, he makes a couple of false starts and he can't get going. This, by the way, is called the suicide tactic, a view that self-refutes. In this case, it's practical suicide. Again, a whole chapter on that. Actually, multiple chapters, because there's a lot of ways for points of view to commit suicide. And he makes a couple of false starts. He can't get going. And finally, he says, it's not fair. I said, what do you mean it's not fair? He said, well, I can't find a way to say it, which it sounds right. I thought I was playing a word trick on him. I said, Gil, it's not right because you're doing the very thing you're telling me not to do. You're contradicting yourself. And sometimes I've had conversations with people, and then they'll go, oh, now you got me all confused, that kind of thing. And I said, no, you were confused when you started. But I say it in the most Christian way possible, right? So there's an example. I see the problem. And the problem is, he is guilty of doing the things he's telling me that I shouldn't be doing, and he's guilty of it while he's telling me I shouldn't be doing. It's a classic self-refutation. How do I exploit that? I use my tactics, and I use questions in a very particular way to do that, all right? I had a student that came up to me once and said, my professor at university, I'm in an anthropology class. She's very supportive of my views as a Christian, no problem. And then I told her I want to be a missionary. And then my professor got bothered. So it's like, if this is your view, that's fine. I'm supporting your view kind of mentality. But then when the Christian says, I want to go and persuade other people of my view, now she's crossed a line. And so the professor says to her, it's wrong to try to change other people's religious views. Now maybe some of you have heard this too. And she came to me and she said, what do I say to my professor? Now, some of you, if you've been, you're on top of this, you might see the problem, because this is also another self-refuting situation, and you might be able to think of a question that you would ask here. Here's what I told her. I said, you ask your professor, who says it's wrong for you to change other people's religious views. You ask her this, Professor, are you trying to change my religious view? You understand that Christianity is an evangelistic religion, right? That's my religious view. Are you saying my religious view is wrong? Now, the answer to that is yes, of course she's saying the religious view is wrong, but she's also saying that you shouldn't be telling people their religious views are wrong. Do you see the conflict there? Okay, that's another suicidal circumstance. We see it, and you got to see it first. And once you see it, now you want to exploit it. You want to point it out in a fair way, in a gracious way, but you want them to think about the problem that they're having. We had a conversation after the last session with a group of gals, and one was asking me about a friend of hers who is a moral relativist, somebody that does not believe there's any objective morality at all. Even this particular person didn't even think that pedophilia was actually wrong. That's how relativistic this person was. But this person was also really woke, right? Really upset about racism. Okay? Well, wait a minute. Is racism wrong? That's the question to ask that person. And if it's wrong, if you say it's wrong, are you saying it's just wrong for you or it's wrong for everybody? Now, do you see, my question is asking for clarification, but I'm also trying to show that person that they are living in a world that they don't belong. They're an atheist, I knew that, and they don't believe in any objective morality, yet they're trying to smuggle morality in with this social issue, that racism is wrong and we ought to all be woke. This doesn't work. There is either objective morality or not. And if there is no objective morality because there's no God, then nothing is wrong. You can choose to do whatever you want, but don't start complaining about somebody else because you have no grounds to do it. That's another suicidal circumstance. Okay, these are all just different examples of doing something very straightforward. If you see that somebody else's view is mistaken, if you know how it goes south, then you want to use your questions to exploit it, because they give you a tremendous tactical advantage. The minute I ask the question that exploits the problem, the ball is in that person's court. And now they're thinking about it and they're stuck with it. All right? That's the key to using Columbo in the third way. And again, I've just given you a couple of examples. I want to close, though, with a very particular kind of example, because there is something else I'm doing with Columbo 3 in this other example that I didn't do in the other ones, all right? There are times when you can actually enlist the other person in the conversation as an ally on your behalf by the way you use your questions. In other words, I'm dealing with somebody who is trying to demonstrate that they're mistaken and they're wrong, but I am going to have them help me out to do that. So I had a gentleman in a Q&A said, prove to me that God exists. That was the challenge. Prove to me that God exists. By the way, if anybody ever says something like that to you, you've got to have a clarification of an important word before you go any further. Prove. I want to know what that person thinks is going to be adequate proof before I try to give any rationale. Because you can talk all day long with all kinds of good evidence and they could just simply dismiss you and say, well, that's not proof, okay? So I pointed this out to him. I said, that puts me at a real disadvantage. Can you rephrase the challenge? He said, okay, can you give me a good reason why God exists? I said, sure. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? That's what I said to him. They're simple questions, but they just kind of lay the foundation before we get to the real issue. And of course, this is the purpose right here. If I have a conclusion I'm getting to, and I have 1, 2, 3 steps to get there, and sometimes when you're making a case, you have a couple of steps to get there, all right? And I try to put those pieces on the table, the person who doesn't want to believe what I believe, they're going to take them off the table. Every time I try to put something out there, I'm not going to get to where I'm going. They're going to gainsay the thing I've already put on the table. They're going to give me a hard time, and I'm never going to make any progress. I can avoid that problem by using Columbo number 3. I'm not going to put the thing on the table. I'm going to have them put it on the table. I'm going to ask them a question that allows them to affirm something that I can use. So this is what I did with the gentleman. I said, do you think that things exist? Simple question. Yeah. I say, okay, good. I do too. Second question, the things that exist, have they always existed? The things that exist, have they always existed? Now, this is a question that's going to the issue of the origin of the universe. Was the universe eternal, or is it, or has it been, or was there an origin to the universe? We talked earlier, there's hardly anybody on the planet who thinks about these things that thinks the universe has been here forever. Nobody believes that anymore because there are good reasons to know otherwise, okay, both philosophic and scientific. And so he said, no, I don't think it's been here forever. Or in other words, it came into existence at one particular point in time. Okay, yes, it did, all right? I agree with that too. Okay, here's my last question. Now I got pieces on the table. He's not going to take those pieces off the table because he put them there in virtue of responding to my questions. You with me so far? Okay, here's my final question. What caused the universe to come into existence? What caused that? Now he said, by the way, I'll make it simple on you. You have 2 choices, only 2. Either something or no thing. Something or no thing. That's it. Real simple. So what say you? Now, he's an atheist. He doesn't want to say that something caused the material universe to come into existence. That denies his atheism. But what's his only other alternative that is left on the table for him to affirm? He's got to say nothing caused the entire universe. Now, whether that's possible or not, I don't think it's possible, but I don't have to make that point. I'm just trying to help this guy see it ain't the odds-on favorite. The smart money is not on the universe popping into existence out of nothing for no reason. That is worse than magic. You know, in magic, you got the magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, okay? In this case, you got no magician. You got no hat. Just got the rabbit. There you go, boom, there's the rabbit. Where'd that rabbit come from? This makes no sense. And so the point that I'm making now, notice I'm using my questions to set up my cosmological argument, essentially. And I'm trying to say very simply and very modestly, the smart money is on God. You want to go with with no God? Okay, that's your choice. That ain't the smart money. Because look, when your wife comes home from work, she sees that new Mercedes SL in the garage. She said, honey, where'd that new Mercedes SL come from? And you say, oh, darling, it just popped into existence out of nothing. That's the way scientists think the universe happened. I don't know why it can't happen to a Mercedes. Ladies, are you going to believe that? Oh, you're not going to believe that. Why? Because it don't make sense. That's not where the smart money is. So now I've taken something that I understand, called a cosmological argument, and I positioned it in a discussion using questions, getting the person who's challenging me to cooperate with me in the process so that when I get to the final point, I can make the final point most strongly, and I did it with a question. You tell me, something or nothing. Now, in the book, there is in the new edition, the 10th anniversary edition, there's a chapter called Inside Out. And I think I made reference to it earlier that it turns out that God has built all kinds of things into the hearts and the minds of non-Christians because they're made in the image of God and they have to live in God's world and they can't get away from that. And they can run from God, but they can't run from themselves, I mentioned. So there are common sense notions that we can appeal to, and I just did it in this discussion. Okay, you're not going to buy that about the Mercedes because it makes no sense. And I'm going to tell you one last conversation I had to close this off. To show you how even atheists know better. I was having dinner with a group of friends, and one was I'm not going to mention any names here, but was a spiritual leader whose name many of you will recognize. He's a dear person. His whole family was there. Other friends were there. His son, who was 18 years old, was sitting right across from me, and in the middle of the dinner party, his son announced to the party that he no longer believed in God. That's really dumb. He was really belligerent about it, too. That's really dumb. There's no evidence, there's no reason. It's irrational to believe in God. And I'm thinking, and his dad was surprised. Everybody was kind of, what? Where'd that come from? So I'm trying to engage him a little bit, with my tactical thing. I talk about Big Bang, need a Big Banger, and the origin of the universe, all of these things. But he is not interested at all in having a conversation. He's just being an 18-year-old. I'm sorry for saying that. He's just being himself. Okay, how about that? But and so I finally gave up. And sometimes you do what you can and then just let it go. But I did make one remark before I finished. And I said, listen, if we were sitting here in the dining area, there's a living room, and then the front door was over there. And I said, look, if you heard this over there, a knock, what would you think? Would you think the knock knocked itself? Or do you think that someone did the knocking? And I'm making reference here now to the origin of the universe. It's just a parallel kind of thing. But like I said, he wasn't really interested in thinking sensibly about it. He just brushed me off, so I just let it go. 15 minutes later, we're having dessert. actually happened. I'm not making this up. We're having dessert, and I hear across the room, who knocks on doors nowadays, right? It's like doorbells. There's this pounding on the door. He looks up from his dessert, and he says, "Who's that?" And I said, "No one." Okay, that's not the best part, though. I mean, that's kind of funny, and I did say that because I'm trying to make a point. But here's what matters. What did he do? He did not think the knock knocked itself. He got up and he answered the door. And it turned out it was some friends of his. Even the atheist who said it was irresponsible and irrational and stupid to believe in God who created the whole universe couldn't bring himself to think that something like a little bitty knock on the door could knock itself, right? He knew better. Now, he wasn't going to admit it to me, and I don't know if he even admitted it to God yet. I haven't followed his life or anything like that. But people know a whole lot more than you think they do. And they have the image of God that they're made in, and they've got eternity in their hearts, and God has placed that there to give us something to use. There is nobody who's really a moral relativist. They say there is no truth. That is a truth that they're proclaiming. We know their truth. We're truth seekers by nature. That's the human condition. And these are all things we can benefit, we can take advantage of. We can be confident that we're dealing with people that God is working in their lives, either in the moment by the Holy Spirit, or at least in the fact that he made them in a way that we have things to say to their genuine needs deep down inside. And all I'm offering you today is an approach that can help you do that most easily and most effectively. That can hopefully, by God's grace, get you off the bench if that's where you're at, and be willing to push the envelope just a little bit, to step into the shallow end of the pool and just begin asking questions. What do you mean by that? Just to get clarification. Or go the next step if you want to do that. How did you come to that conclusion? Be a student of other people's views. And if that's all the further you go, I promise you the Holy Spirit's going to use that in people's lives. But I hope you go further. I hope you learn some of the things that are wrong with the challenges, and you learn to maneuver using Columbo number 3. It's not that hard. You can do it. And everything counts on us as followers of Christ being ambassadors for Christ into that world that desperately needs Christ. So let me close with this final thought from the scripture. And it's not a tactics thing, but it is from me to you as your brother in Christ. I want you to make a note of a passage in the Gospel of Mark. It's chapter 15 and verse 15. You don't need to go there right now. I'll tell you what's going on and what it says, but I want you to mark it. It's easy to remember. Mark 15:15. This is Jesus' trial. Jesus is before Pilate. Pilate does not want to crucify Jesus. He knows that Jesus is not guilty of anything worthy of death. He knows that the Jews have brought him there because of envy. He knows there's this political thing going on. He does not want to abet that. His wife has given him a hard time, telling Pilate, don't mess with that guy. He's dangerous. I've been having bad dreams about him. Let him go. Leave him alone. But he's in a tough spot because he represents Caesar in that town. But he has a chance. In this season, I can give away one guy. We got Barabbas, we got Christ. He's hoping they're going to choose Jesus because Barabbas is a rabble-rouser. I mean, the Jewish leadership doesn't like Barabbas. He creates problems for them. He's a zealot. He messes up the system. The Romans are going to be mad at them. But instead of having Jesus be released, they want Barabbas. They call for Barabbas. Well, what do we do with Jesus? Crucify him. Mark 15, verse 15. Mark it. Wishing to please the crowd. Wishing to please the crowd. Pilate had released Barabbas, had Jesus scourged and crucified. When I read that passage not too long ago, it just went right to the soles of my feet, went right through me. I'm 71 years old. I got another 10 or 15 years going here, and I'm going to stay in the stirrups as long as I can. I want to finish well. I do not want to get dragged off my horse and dragged into something crazy. You guys got a lot longer time to be faithful. It's going to be harder for you. And the world is pulling much more harder on you than it ever pulled on me. Do not make the choice that Pilate made, wishing to please the crowd. Don't give in to the mob. Don't give in to those who are trying to drag you away from Christ with the promise that they're going to like you. They will not like you. Not if you're marginally faithful. So if they're not going to like you being marginally faithful, there's no reason to be just marginally faithful. You might as well be totally faithful. The fear of man brings a snare, it says in Proverbs. Don't fall into that trap. If you haven't done it yet as a follower of Christ, decide right now. You are never going to cross that line, no matter what it costs you. And we are living in an age, it is the first time in the history of the United States of America where Christians are actually experiencing genuine suffering and persecution for being Christians. People who are followers of Christ and are holding true to the gospel and the truth of God's world are losing their jobs. They are losing their livelihoods. They are being canceled. They are being wiped out. They are getting pulled down. It's costing people more and more. And so many of them are going, man, this hurts. And there's a lot of young people like you, your age, who call themselves Christians, who care more about what their friends think about them than what Jesus of Nazareth thinks about them. Don't let it be you. Dear brothers and sisters, don't let it be you. Let me pray for you. Lord, I love these guys. Golly, how could I not? What a sweet group of people. What a tremendous work you're doing here at Masters. What a fragrant aroma. What a bright light. Please, Father, invest each of these students and each of these teachers and instructors and every worker behind the scene the powerful dose of your Spirit, that this group of people goes forth and radically transforms the world that you put them in for the cause of Christ. And I thank you that I get to play a very small part making a contribution here today. I pray that you would bear fruit that would remain in their lives for Jesus' sake. Amen and amen.